guys, welcome back to Bridging the Gap. And today I'm going to be your co host, Mittens. And today we will be talking through the fourth episode of Bridging the Gap. And today we're going to be talking about the Gilgo Beach murders. And I know a lot of you might have seen recent developments in the news. There's been an ongoing trial that's soon to start. So before all of that, I wanted to give you guys a deep dive into the case as well as an update on some recent developments. And I'm hoping that this will inform you all before you go and watch the trial. Hopefully, we all will go watch the trial. And if you would like a court summary, trial summary, we can deep dive into what each of the things that the defendant or the prosecutor is saying, how that affects the case and molds it. So if you guys want to see that, let me know and I'll get that to y'all. But without further ado, let's go get started. But just for some quick background, I just want to say that this case has gone on for more than a decade, honestly. It's almost from the 1900s up till now. Obviously, the killings were not up till now. The killings were all within a decade, I'd say, around, except with the addition of new victims, we don't quite know where they fit in the timeline. However, we do know that it's a very long, ongoing investigation. And there's been a lot of questions into whether the police investigation was done correctly, given the fact that these victims were sex workers and they feel like the police kind of they're kind of pushed the case to the side because they didn't see it as important. Because this marginalized group of women, they didn't feel like they needed to protect them or give them any justice. And that's a big thing that's going to be called into question later throughout this episode. But I do just want to give a quick little warning. We won't be talking about anything too detailed. I won't be giving too many details or anything. But I do want to say that there are mentions of murder and dismemberment as well as the death of a child and infant. So I just want to give that quick trigger warning before jumping into this podcast. So if you're not going to join us today, that's okay. We'll see you next time. But for everybody else, let's get started. The Gilgo Beach murders is a chilling tale of mystery, terror, and tragedy, and this unfolded along the eerie shores of Long Island, New York, the windswept dunes and the dense thickets of the area, and the picturesque scene of the day became a sinister backdrop for a decade-long puzzle that would not only baffle investigators and haunt families, but it also captured the nation's attention. The story of how a seemingly ordinary man led a double life as a ruthless predator has sent many shockwaves through the public. This reignited discussions about law enforcement and failures, including the dangers that are lurking in the shadows. So it all began with the discovery, and this is back in 2010 when Shannon Gilbert, a 24-year-old sex worker, disappeared under mysterious circumstances after a frantic 911 call. Gilbert's last known words were, and I quote, "They're trying to kill me." This sent a shiver down the spine of those who later listened to the recording. Her disappearance led to a police search along Ocean Parkway, but the search did not immediately reveal Shannon. Instead, it unearthed a far more horrifying discovery. On December 11th of 2010, during the search for Shannon, a canine unit discovered a set of skeletal remains buried in the sand. Over the next few days, three more bodies were found nearby, and they were all wrapped in burlap sacks. These women were later identified as Melissa Bartholomew, Amber Lynn Costello, Maureen Barnard Barnes, and Megan Waterman. And they shared a hauntingly similar profile as they were all sex workers who advertised online. And the initial discovery was just the beginning of a macrame tale. In the months that followed, the body count only grew, with investigators expanding their search along Ocean Parkway. By spring of 2011, six more sets of remains were uncovered and scattered over a 10-mile stretch. The new victims included Jessica Taylor, whose partial remains had been found in Manorville years prior, and the mysterious Peaches, who was identified by a distinct tattoo on a dismembered torso. Perhaps most chilling were the remains of an unidentified toddler found near Peaches. These remains were sadly believed to be her daughter. Adding to the horror, authorities linked some of the newly discovered remains to body parts found in other locations years prior. This indicates that the killer had been active for over a decade. Public fear surged and theories ran wild. Was this the work of a lone predator? Or were multiple killers using the same dumping ground? The trail began to grow cold, and leads were scarce. The sprawling investigation soon hit a big wall. Early suspects, including a disgraced police chief and local residents, were scrutinized, but most of them were ultimately cleared. Critics accused law enforcement of mishandling evidence and neglecting the cases due to the victims' professions, them being sex workers. Families of the victims voiced their anguish in public forums, with some accusing the police of failing to prioritize their loved ones because they were sex workers. Public opinion was fractured. Many saw the case as an emblematic of system failures and how society and law enforcement treated these marginalized women. Others speculated about shadowy conspiracies, ranging from corrupt officials to affluent Long Island elites. Meanwhile, Shannon Gilbert's family fought tirelessly to keep her case in the spotlight, adamant that her death was no accident. A decade of frustration. For over a decade, the Gilgo Beach murders began synonymous with many unanswered questions. Advances in forensic technology and the growing prominence of true crime media kept the case alive in the public consciousness. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports speculated on the killer's identity, each new theory reigniting hope and fear. During this time, law enforcement faced mounting pressure from both the victims' families and the public. Online sleuths and true crime enthusiasts poured over these police reports and theories, with some even claiming to have their own suspects. Frustration mounted as years passed with no resolution, and families of the victims continued to push for justice, never letting the case fade from the public eye. The breakthrough. In January of 2023, a breakthrough finally came. Law enforcement announced the arrest of Humerman. Rex Huerman. I'm sorry, guys. I just can't say his name with a straight face because it's genuinely so wacky. Either way, here we go. They announced the arrest of Huerman, a 59-year-old architect living in Massapequa Park, a quiet suburb less than 20 miles from Gilgo Beach. Huerman's arrest shocked his neighbors, who described him as an ordinary family man, but the evidence they found told a completely different story. Investigators revealed that Huerman had been under surveillance for months, and key pieces of evidence included cell phone records that placed Huerman near the victim's last known locations, DNA evidence from a discarded pizza crust that matched samples found on one of the burlap sacks, online search history linking Huerman to disturbing queries about torture, murder techniques, and the investigation itself. And I want to discuss this point really quick because it comes up a lot in true crime cases, especially one of the most notable ones being the Zodiac Killer. But it's just this idea that killers tend to obsess over their crimes, often taking pride in what they've done or feeling pride that nobody knows that it was them. And this can especially be seen through this case, as there are many newspaper clippings found in his office, as well as his search history showing Googling the Long Island murders several times. And I think this just shows you that he has no remorse, that he does not feel bad about what he did. And as a way of looking at these reports and reading all these gruesome things about what happened to these poor women, it's a way for him to relive the crime. And I think it gives him a sort of satisfaction. And I think that's truly disgusting that that's the way that he feels about the crime, towards the point where he wants to keep reliving those ideas. He wants to keep hearing them in his head, and he wants to feel proud about what he's done, showing that he absolutely has no remorse and that these kills were absolutely not an accident. However, a search of Huerman's home uncovered chilling evidence, and among the items seized were a collection of burner phones. And most people believe that they had been used to contact the victims. One of the victims in question, her family members were contacted several times during the peak busy hours of New York traffic. They were contacted. So, police investigators obviously weren't able to trace the phone. However, they were contacted and they were told chilling things about their loved one who had passed away. They were told things about, I'm going to kill you, like, I'm going to kill her again, or all the things that he did to her. They were, in general, very threatening. And however, they did prove no use in finding the killer at the time, as it was done during the peak hours of New York traffic where the killer could not be traced easily. In his home, they also found detailed maps of Long Island, and these include marked locations near the dumping grounds where the victims were found. A hidden cache of disturbing photographs and writings that the investigators described as dark and obsessive. Tools and materials consistent with those used to restrain and kill the victims, and a soundproof basement. This raised many suspicions about where the crimes may have occurred, many believing that he purposefully soundproofed his basement just so that he could commit these murders down there. And another thing that I've also read about is the fact that he used to commit these murders when his wife went out of town, when nobody was there. And I think this further just shows that he knew what he was doing and he was waiting for the right moment to attack. The last thing that they found in his home were over 200 firearms, with many of them unregistered. This added another layer of potential criminal activity, giving the courts something else to charge him for. So the prosecutors are definitely having a field day with this one. And along those terms, let's get into the legal proceedings. In late January of 2025, Huerman's defense team filed motions seeking to separate the charges against him into multiple trials. They argued that combining all charges could prejudice the jury, given the extensive media coverage and the varying circumstances of each case. Legal experts noted that such a strategy is not uncommon in complex cases involving multiple charges, as it can provide a fairer trial for the defendant. And just to expand upon this point, I just want to talk about this idea. And I think that it's honestly kind of crazy that they're trying to even split up the trials, considering that all of the victims had the exact same profile. However, they were all killed in many different ways, in different circumstances. They were not all killed in the same way. There was no like same murder tactic or anything. But I do think that it's interesting that they're deciding to separate these cases, because although it could lead to a fair trial, it could also lead him getting more years, which each with each murder giving like 15 to 20 years. You add all those seven charges up, that's essentially life. That's life in prison. And I do agree with the fact that a jury would be biased if you see someone who has seven murder charges against them. I think even I, as a jury, would be much more likely to claim them as guilty than if it was just one murder charge. Because seven murder charges is absolutely insane, obviously. A significant point of contention in the pretrial hearings has been the admissibility of nuclear DNA evidence. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office maintains that nuclear DNA analysis is a well established and widely accepted scientific method. This evidence is very crucial for linking Huerman to the crime scenes. However, Huerman's defense attorney, Michael Brown, he said that this specific type of DNA evidence has not been previously utilized in New York state courts, and he questions its accuracy. And now to expand upon this point, I just want to talk about this new type of nuclear DNA evidence. I believe it was first made in California and it has been used in a few trials over there. However, it's not been widely used. Most people have not started using it in most states. So this will be the first time if it is allowed in court for it to be used in New York. And I think that that is a great thing for these victims as there's even better evidence to link this man to the crimes. However, it will not help the defendant. We are not trying to help the defendant here because he is thoroughly guilty. We can all agree of that. Obviously, that's the courts. That's the courts to decide. Allegedly, all of this is alleged, but in most people's eyes, he is pretty guilty. There was a recent discovery of additional evidence, and among the items seized from Huerman's residence were numerous news clippings and articles about the Gilgo Beach murders, as I talked about earlier. Prosecutors suggest that this indicates Huerman's prolonged and intense interest in the case, possibly pointing to a psychological compulsion or an attempt to monitor the investigation's progress. Investigators also found a secret storage unit rented by Heuermann containing personal items linked to the victims, further solidifying the case against him. Some of the items included jewelry, driver's licenses, and handwritten notes detailing potential victims. This suggested an organized and premeditated pattern of behavior, and these few details are extremely important in court, especially when trying to prove that something was premeditated or that it was planned versus it being accidental. Another quick thing I'd like to point out is the idea of him storing these things that the victims owned or that represented them. And this is another big thing we see in serial killers, as they have the tendency to hold these items like a trophy or a symbol of their crime. And when they look at these items, it's like a way of reliving the crime. It's like a little memento for what happened. And I think this further implicates him as a serial killer, obviously, allegedly. However, it does further implicate him with recent trends we've seen with other serial killers, including Jeffrey Dahmer, with him keeping different things as sort of trophy of the crime that he committed. In late 2024, authorities officially linked a seventh victim to the case. Advances in DNA testing identified the remains of Valeria Mack. This was another sex worker who had been missing for years. Investigators connected hairs found on Mac's remains to Huerman's family members, further implicating him in her murder. This development raised further questions about whether there were more victims yet to be discovered. And I just want to talk about this point because a lot of people have been trying to bring the wife and the child into this case. And especially from what I said earlier, it's pretty clear that the wife and the child both had nothing to do with these, as he would only commit murders when his wife was out of town and his child was not in the house. And just because he had a hair from his child on the body does not implicate him in the case. As we all know, hair is everywhere. It is legitimately everywhere. It's all over the floors, it's all over everybody. And I think this idea that the daughter's hair strand was found on the body does not implicate her in the case because many people have raised those doubts. However, most of the media and the prosecutors do firmly believe that they had nothing to do with this case and they will not be put on trial. So the public had a lot of reactions, and there were a lot of reactions from family members as well. So many expressed their relief that the case is progressing, while others remained skeptical about whether Humerman acted alone. The victims' families have conveyed a range of emotions, from gratitude for the renewed investigative efforts to frustration over the prolonged duration of the case. Advocacy groups continue to call for comprehensive investigations and systematic changes to prevent such tragedies in the future. A lot of skepticism persists among some community members regarding the strength of the evidence and the possibility of Huerman's involvement in all linked cases. And the identification of Larry Mack has provided a bittersweet closure for her relatives who had endured years of uncertainty. Advocacy groups supporting the victims' families continue to call for these investigations, as well as help support these families through the legal process. As the legal process unfolds, the community remains vigilant, seeking justice for the victims and to answer possibly many lingering questions that are still surrounding the Gilgo Beach murders. And there are still many lingering questions to dive into them. Despite the arrest, there are many mysteries that remain. Shannon Gilbert's death, still officially ruled accidental, it continues to divide opinions among people on whether it was accidental, whether it was a murder, whether it was in fact Rex Heuermann, or if it was somebody else, or how this even ties into the other cases. And additionally, the identities of some victims and the possibility of accomplices or additional perpetrators remain unresolved, meaning that they have essentially not gotten any leads to there being another perpetrator or an alliance or anyone assisting in the committing of the crime. They do believe that Rex Heuermann acted alone. The possibility of Heuermann being connected to other unsolved cases is now under investigation, expanding the scope of this case even further. And as we talked about earlier, there were so many bodies found along Long Island and Gilgo Beach and surrounding areas. So many to the point where the police were unable to identify many of the remains that were found. And I think coming in recent years, we will find those remains. We will have better DNA testing evidence that has already been used, have even better ones that will be able to identify who these victims are and whether the perpetrator is Rex Heuermann or somebody else. Hopefully, we will be able to put that person behind bars. Now, just to conclude real quick before I bring up some quick discussion points that you guys can comment about or tell me your opinions on, the Gilgo Beach murders weave a grim tapestry of human tragedy, systematic failure, and dodged determination. As the trials of Rex Heuermann unfold, the world watches, hoping for justice, not only for the victims, but also for their families, who have endured the unbearable weight of loss and uncertainty for so long. In the end, the marshes of Gilgo Beach may hold more secrets yet to be uncovered. But for now, the search for the truth continues, a reminder that even the darkest mysteries can eventually come to light. And I think this case has so many unanswered questions, mainly because of the complications of it. There's so many different ideas, and nothing has been put into concrete or nothing has been put in specific place. And I think that that's what's causing all the questions in the case. And there's a lot of theories about this case as well. And I want to deep dive into some of these theories and talk about them as well with you guys, as long as giving you guys an opportunity to have some discussion in the comments about what you think actually happened and what ideas you support. I want to say one more time that any of the theories that I will be talking about, all of these are very circumstantial. None of these are like this is going to happen or this is what they're going for in court. These are all like maybe theories that people come up with on the internet. It's netizens, people on the internet, nothing crazy, nothing that nothing that I want to accuse of being happened is essentially what I'm trying to say. All right. So, let's dive into the first theory. The first theory is the multiple killers theory. Some investigators and armchair detectives, meaning people just sitting at home, they believe that the killings were carried out by more than one person. The differences in the manner in which bodies were disposed of, with some being wrapped in burlap and others dismembered and scattered, suggest the possibility of multiple perpetrators or copycat killers using the same dumping ground. And we've seen this idea of copycat killers a lot, and it could also be used in this case as well, with people mimicking these killings along Long Island and possibly using similar tactics, but using the same dumping ground so that it can all be pushed onto one person, meaning that not all of these really could have been Rex Heuermann, or maybe more recent discoveries now might not be linked to him, but to other people. So that is one theory. The second theory is the police cover up or corruption theory. And former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke was arrested in 2016 for obstructing a federal investigation into police corruption. He was accused of preventing the FBI from assisting in the Gilgo Beach case. Some believe that Burke's actions were an intentional cover up, possibly to protect high profile individuals involved in the killings. So, this could possibly mean that there's someone who has a really high profile or someone who's an elite who can pay off the police and try to get it covered up. That's another theory. Number three is the elite or sex trafficking ring theory. Some theorists believe that the killings were part of a larger sex trafficking operation involving wealthy and powerful figures who used escorts and then murdered them to cover their tracks. This theory gained traction due to the long delay in solving the case and the alleged law enforcement mishandling of the evidence. The next theory is a Long Island serial killer is still out there theory. And although Rex Heuermann has been charged in several of the murders, some believe that the true Long Island serial killer remains at large. The argument is that Heuermann may have killed some of the victims, but the differences in the way the bodies were found suggest that someone else is also probably responsible. And this kind of links to the first idea that there are multiple accomplices or that there was a copycat killer. The next theory is the connection to other cold cases. Some investigators suspect that the person responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders may have committed crimes elsewhere. For example, the Manorville butcher killings, where dismembered remains found in Manorville, New York, bear some similarities to the Gilgo Beach murders. Could the same killer be responsible for both cases? And this has been brought up a lot, especially with some of the remains of Valeria Mack being found both in Gilgo Beach and in Manorville, where these other killings happened, linking these two cases together even more. And I think this is the one of the more believable theories with that piece of evidence. And the next theory is the Shannon Gilbert murder cover up theory. And officially, Shannon Gilbert's death has been ruled an accidental drowning. However, her family and some forensic experts argue that she was murdered, possibly by the same killer responsible for the other victims. Her 911 call, in which she repeatedly said she was in danger, adds weight to the theory that she was fleeing from someone who intended to kill her. And another thing that needs to be known is it was not known at the time whether she was doing drugs or whether she was out of her mind. And it could be very possible that she was just on drugs, that she was running. And that's another theory that comes up with that idea. So this one is not as believable, but I do think it is hard to believe that her death was indeed accidental. However, I do not think that her 911 call is indicative of that result. And the last one is the Huerman accomplice or family involvement theory. And I do not support this theory at all. However, it is a theory out there, as I talked about earlier. Some people have been speculating with the recent developments in the DNA evidence involving the daughter's hair on one of the victims. So we're still going to talk about it anyway. However, I would strongly discourage people not to spread this theory as it could potentially harm his family even more when they have not been publicly named suspects or charged of anything whatsoever yet. So, some internet sleuths speculate that Rex Heuermann may not have acted alone and that his wife and family members were out of time during some of the murders, leading some to question whether that was a coincidence or if there was prior knowledge or involvement from someone close to him. Could he have had an accomplice? Is a question that many people are asking. Public discourse continues to evolve as more details emerge, with true crime forums and social media flooded with discussions, like on here, amateur investigations and conspiracy theories. And I think that these ideas are very interesting as there's so many new theories to be unlocked and there's so many questions that are unanswered, leading to the development of these new theories because there's so many unanswered questions. And I'm just hoping with the new trial coming into place that we can answer a lot of these questions and finally put this case to rest as it has been one of the biggest cases for the longest time ever. And I'm really excited to watch the trial. So if you are too, don't forget to comment down below when you're going to watch the trial, if you're going to watch it live and everything. And don't forget to also comment down any discussions that you have and what you think your theory is. What do you align with the most? And I've got to say that I am most aligning with the cold case theory as well as the serial killer is still out there theory. And I don't really believe these 100%. But those are the ones that I align with the most out of the conspiracy theories. I think they're the most backed up by evidence so far from what we have found. However, I do believe Rex Heuermann is responsible for several deaths. I do not know if he is responsible for all of the deaths of these women. However, I do believe he is responsible for most of them. Again, allegedly, as he is not prosecuted yet. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let us know in the comments what you think about these true crime podcasts. If you like them, or we should do something a little bit more lighthearted. I didn't want to make this too much of a depressing episode, just wanted to make it more informational for everybody. Anywho, thank you guys so much for listening today, and we'll see you guys next week for another episode of Bridging the Gap. Bye!